Hi friends, it's Grace and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be doing a comparison between The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo and Malibu Rising by Jenkins Reid. And the reason that I chose to do this comparison is because I think that it's really interesting how two books by the same author, one of them can perfectly capture me so much and just enchant me and possibly be one of my absolute favorite books, and another, even though it has some similarities, some fundamental similarities, it also has some fundamental differences that really just did not do it for me. And I wanted to explore a little bit of why that is and just to do a little bit of a comparison. Nothing too in-depth, but the things that I noticed and some of my thoughts on these two books. So for those of you who have seen my previous wrap-up, you'll have heard me talk about The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and Malibu Rising I actually have not spoken about in a video yet because I listened to that on audiobook this month in May, so I have not had a chance to put that in my wrap-up or anything like that just yet. But, not to spoil my own May wrap-up, but The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo was a 5-star read for me. It was an absolutely amazing experience for me, whereas Malibu Rising was a lot more average and a little bit bland and didn't really capture me. So I wanted to take a look at why that would have happened. So there are some obvious similarities between these books. The most prominent of which is that they are written by the same author, and they also take place in the same universe. And the interesting thing about these two is that they both have the same general focus on the lives of famous individuals, and they're kind of exploring morally questionable decisions, and they're approaching the lives of famous people in a behind-the-scenes type of style. And then the other thing is that I listened to both of these books on audiobooks, so in that sense I have a direct comparison between them in terms of the listening experience. I have not read these physically, so I do not know if my experience would have been different if I did it that way. So there are definitely some fundamental similarities between these two books, and although I have not read Daisy Jones and the Six by Jenkins Reid, I know that that also has some of these same fundamental similarities, that they're just Jenkins Reid's style in terms of approaching a story of famous people from behind the scenes, and I'm pretty sure that that is also present in Daisy Jones and the Six. And this just seems to be her overarching style. So I find it interesting that I think that I'm not alone in this opinion, that a lot of people do not like Malibu Rising as much as her other installments. So let's look at some of the differences. First of all, I listened, like I said, to both of these on audiobook, and one big difference here is that while Julia Whelan is a narrator for both of them, The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo had multiple narrators, while Malibu Rising only had one. So Julia Whelan, I really like her and I think that she does a great job, but I do think that a single narrator versus multiple narrators does give you an advantage on the multiple narrators side, because in the story and the life story of Evelyn Hugo, I thought that the voices were just captured so well. And one narrator, good as she is, just can't always do that. You can't be so distinct when you're just one voice, and I loved the different voices that we got in Seven Husbands. So that definitely is a factor in my enjoyment, but of course that wouldn't come up in the physical book, so I can only consider that because I listened to both audiobooks. The second difference is that both of these books employ a split timeline in telling their stories, where you have a present timeline and a past timeline, but Seven Husbands leaned a lot more into a retrospective memoir style telling of the story, whereas Malibu Rising leaned more into in the moment style of storytelling, because even when you were in the past timeline, it was like being there in the past timeline rather than being told about it. by a person. And that does make a difference in the tone, because it is a difference in the perspective that you are like looking through. You're looking through a different lens. So that definitely impacts the way that characters are viewed and the way that actions are described. And it is a really interesting difference, because I think that I don't have a significant preference for one over the other, but I do think that the retrospective memoir style of The Seven Husbands was just perfect for that story. It fit absolutely beautifully, and I really loved the tone that we were given when Evelyn was telling her own story. Now, next I'm gonna move on to two things that in combination I think make the biggest difference for me in terms of the tones of these two books. Because a really, really big thing for me in my experience with each of these books was the use and the approach to the infidelity trope. And I'm not going to give spoilers for either of these, I'm going to be vague, but I liked the way that it was done in Seven Husbands, while I did not like the way that it was done in Malibu Rising. And reading about infidelity is not something that I generally like, but I think that the massive difference that was made between these two books was the way that characters' actions are presented. Because in one book, you kind of have a very honest and forthright and I don't know, more self-reflective tone of exploring past actions and basically being honest about whether they were right or not. And then in the other, you kind of have like this constant attempt to justify your own actions. And it's not that I don't find that realistic, because I think that it's unfortunately realistic that people try to justify their own actions when it comes to infidelity, but I do hate the experience of reading that. And so that's just a personal opinion of mine, because I understand that people might appreciate the more realistic look at that and they may have actually enjoyed that look at it, but I did not enjoy that at all. And so this goes back to the style of storytelling for me. Like, I think that these things are very intertwined, because in the retrospective style, the ability to present things is a lot different, because when you're looking back, you can say, I was wrong. And when you're in the moment, you are experiencing someone trying to justify their actions. And I think that that just makes a massive difference in my experience reading the books. Another thing that honestly bothered me about Malibu Rising was that the fact that these books take place in the same universe is a very interesting little tidbit, but the thing that I didn't like is that Seven Husbands had such an interesting cast of characters, and the biggest crossover character between these two books, like the character that is the most prevalent in Malibu Rising, is literally the worst character from Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. Like, of all of the people that were presented in that book, if I had like a least favorite and a person that I just thought was the worst, it was this person. And they were the ones that were chosen to be in Malibu Rising. And I'm like, why? Like, why? I do get the story that was being told in Malibu Rising, that's not what I'm saying, but that's just a pet peeve for me, because, man, like, that person is the worst. I think another huge factor here is what you expect from each book versus what each book gives you. Because when I went into Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, I got what I was expecting while also getting something that was not at all what I was expecting. And that thing that I wasn't expecting, I loved. I absolutely adored the choice that was made in telling the story. And so that was an extremely pleasant surprise for me. Whereas with Malibu Rising, I had heard this pitched, and even the like synopsis gives you the impression that you're following a party where you're looking at one night where these siblings' lives change forever. And I really feel like that's not what I got. Like, it's true that this book takes place over a 24-hour period, but when you look at the dual timeline, you're really focused, more than I expected to be, on the past timeline, which is fine because you see parts of these characters' pasts, but then at the same time, I was really expecting the focus to be a lot smaller and on like a very short period of time, where when we finally did get to explore that period of time, it was kind of anticlimactic because I didn't really feel like the ends of that journey were what I was expecting or what I was hoping for. And in terms of character journeys, there was one character in Malibu Rising that I truly felt for and I was truly rooting for. And there were a bunch of other characters that didn't like tug at my heartstrings too much. And there was definitely one character that I thought was underutilized and could definitely have been better served if they had a storyline that was actually more similar to some of the characters in Seven Husbands, and that in itself would have been a pleasant surprise for me in Malibu Rising. But it just felt like this book was at the same time so long in terms of timeline and so short in terms of timeline, and neither one of those was really doing what I wanted it to in terms of allowing me to connect to the characters and invest in them, aside from one, which was Nina. Whereas in The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, her story was so compelling all the way through, and the way that she told it was perfect, and the way that she talked about the other people in there that she had relationships with, like all of those people were so compelling. And the thing that really stood out to me is that Evelyn Hugo knew who she was and who she wanted to be, and even when she made mistakes or even when she wasn't a good person, she wasn't shying away from that and trying to pretend that it was something else. And so she did go through a lot of growth, and I was rooting for her as she went through that growth, and I was rooting for other people around her, but the approach to characters was just so different between the two books. It's weird that they were written by the same author, honestly. And in terms of the plot, I thought that the plot of Evelyn Hugo was stronger, and the twist at the end was also strong, and the plot of Malibu Rising was just a little bit average and not doing anything really for me. So I guess what I'm saying is I am not sure whether to read Daisy Jones and the Six, because I've had two completely different experiences so far with Taylor Jenkins Reid, and maybe it's just luck of the draw that I chose to read Seven Husbands first and Malibu Rising second, but I would really love to know what you think I should do based on what I think about these two books if you have read them. And I would really, I don't know, we'll see how it goes. I will probably leave a time gap in between if I do choose to pick up Daisy Jones and the Six, because I don't want to be comparing it too directly to the other two, because that definitely didn't work in Malibu Rising's favor after how much I loved Seven Husbands. So I think that that is all that I have. Again, this wasn't too in-depth because I didn't really want to get into spoilers, but this was just a few of my thoughts and some things that I noticed when comparing the two books. So I thought that it was interesting to talk about, and I hope that you enjoyed it. Please like this video if you liked it. Subscribe if you'd like to see more content from me. I post new videos every Monday and Thursday, and I will have information about my Discord, Patreon, socials, etc. in the description, and I will see you in my next one. I hope that you have a fantastic rest of your day. Bye!